In the northwestern corner of the United States, beyond the noise of highways and far away from cities lit up with ambition and insomnia, lay a quiet little town that most maps didn't even bother to name. But those who had been there called it Stillgrove, a place where time slowed down, trees whispered through the wind, and the river that ran along its spine never stopped flowing. In Stillgrove, the river wasn't just a body of water, it was a presence. It seemed to have memory, soul, and rhythm. And every morning, like clockwork, one man could be found sitting on a smooth stone beside that river, cross-legged, silent, unmoving. His name was Eli Thompson. Nobody knew exactly where he came from or why he had chosen to live such a quiet life. But those who lived in Stillgrove knew that Eli wasn't an ordinary old man. He had something about him, an aura of peace so profound that even wild animals didn't startle when walking past him. People whispered stories. Some said he was once a millionaire who walked away from Wall Street. Others claimed he had been a soldier who had seen too much war. A few believed he was a monk who had simply chosen to be alone. But none of those tales mattered much. What mattered was that he was always there, by the river, listening, thinking, just being. He was rushed to the ER. They told him it was just a panic attack, just stress, just exhaustion, just burnout, just everything. Lying in the hospital bed, staring at the white ceiling tiles, David realized something profound. He had built a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt empty on the inside. A few days later, as he sifted through old letters his late mother had written him, he found one that mentioned a distant relative who lives by a river in Oregon and has found a kind of peace this world forgot. That line clung to him. It wasn't a plan. It was a whisper of possibility. So he booked a flight to Portland, then drove east through winding mountain roads and thick green forests until he arrived in Stillgrove. He didn't even know what he was looking for, just that he couldn't keep living the way he was. Asking around town, he found the trail that led to the river, and there, like a painting come to life, was Eli, sitting on that same smooth stone, his eyes closed, his hands resting gently on his knees, the wind rustling through his silver hair. David stood awkwardly, unsure how to interrupt. Eventually, he said, "Are you Eli Thompson? I think you might be my great-uncle. My mom was Catherine Clark." Eli opened his eyes slowly, looked up at him with no surprise, only warmth. "You came," he said softly, like he had been expecting him all along. David didn't know what to say next. He expected questions or advice, maybe a handshake, but Eli just smiled, nodded toward the riverbank, and said, "Sit." And so he did. That first day, they sat for hours without speaking, just listening to the water. It made David uncomfortable. Every second felt like an hour, but there was something oddly calming about it, something different from the life he had left behind. In the days that followed, David stayed in Eli's small wooden cabin. No Wi-Fi, no microwave, just candles, books, and a fireplace that smelled like pine and warmth. They didn't talk much, but when they did, Eli said things that stuck like seeds in David's soul. One morning, while they were watching a heron glide over the river, David finally asked, "Don't you get bored here?" Eli chuckled, shook his head, and replied, "Boredom is just the body craving distraction. Stillness isn't boredom, it's presence. It's where you hear your soul again." That line shook David in a way no TED Talk ever had. Eli chuckled, shook his head, and replied, "Boredom is just the body craving distraction. Stillness isn't boredom, it's presence. It's where you hear your soul again." That line shook David in a way no TED Talk ever had. He started to slow down. At first, it was unbearable. No emails, no likes, no notifications. But slowly, that silence turned into a kind of music. He noticed the sound of leaves brushing each other in the wind, the way morning light painted gold over the water, the way his breath moved in and out like waves. Eli taught him to walk slowly, to eat slowly, to think slowly, to be, not do. One night, as they sat by a small fire, David asked, Why did you leave everything behind?" Eli took a long breath and said, "I didn't leave. I returned. This," he gestured to the stars, the trees, the river, "this is the world. That other one? It's a theater, a good one, but not always real." David stayed in Still Grove for nearly 3 months. He read poetry. He wrote in a journal. He even learned how to cook using firewood and fresh herbs grown nearby. He helped Eli plant vegetables, watched deer walk past their cabin window, and listened to stories that had no climax, just gentle truths. And for the first time in his adult life, he felt whole. Eventually, David knew it was time to return. But this time, he didn't go back to his old life. He moved to a quieter city, built a new kind of startup, a wellness platform that helped people create space, not noise. He worked with intention, not addiction. He made time to walk barefoot in grass. He unplugged every weekend, and every morning he sat for 10 minutes, closed his eyes, and listened to the sound of his own breath and the imaginary echo of the river he left behind. Years later, when Eli passed away peacefully in his sleep, people from all around came to Still Grove. No big ceremony, just stories. They didn't talk about his past. They talked about how they felt after meeting him. Calmer, deeper, lighter. David stood at the stone where Eli always sat. The river still flowed. The wind still whispered. He placed a small stone beside Eli's seat and whispered, "Thank you for showing me the strength in stillness." And then he closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and listened. Not for success, not for answers, but for something deeper. Peace. Remember, you don't always have to move fast to succeed. You don't always have to chase. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is sit beside your own river and listen. But what does that really mean? For David, it didn't mean giving up his dreams. It didn't mean walking away from society forever. It meant rebuilding his rhythm. When he returned to city life, this time in Vancouver, he didn't run back to chaos. He returned with clarity. He was no longer a man racing against the clock, begging for purpose. He was a man who understood the clock had no power over his peace. He began every day with silence, not meditation apps or guided voices, just his breath and a small cup of tea. He placed a tiny, smooth stone from Still Grove next to his desk, his reminder. And when his world got loud again, as the world always does, he'd close his eyes and recall the river. That river wasn't just water anymore. It was a place within him. One afternoon during a business panel, David was asked, "What's your secret to productivity?" The crowd leaned in. David paused, smiled, and said gently, "Stillness. I work less but live more. I listen to my own silence before I make noise in the world. Try it. Listen to the space between your thoughts. There's magic there." People laughed politely, some nodded, most didn't understand. But one young woman, seated in the back, began to cry. After the talk, she walked up to him. "I don't know what happened," she whispered. "I just realized how long it's been since I felt quiet. Thank you." And that's when David knew the real legacy Eli had left wasn't in what he did. It was in how he lived. His peace had spread. Quietly. Gently. Like water slipping into cracks. Like sunlight through a forest. Years continued to pass. David aged, his hair grayed. But unlike many around him, he didn't fear getting older. He embraced it, because now he understood what time really was. A river. You don't stop it, you don't fight it. You flow with it. Eventually, David bought a cabin, not as remote as Eli's, but surrounded by woods and near a small stream. Every summer, he invited young minds from across North America, burned-out tech workers, anxious students, writers who had lost their voice, veterans struggling with silence. They came seeking solutions. They left with stories. He never charged them, never advertised. Word spread from heart to heart. He didn't teach them to run faster. He taught them to stand still with strength. They sat around bonfires, walked barefoot in the soil. They watched dragonflies dance in the air, and at night, They asked David the same question he once asked Eli.
What's the most important thing you've learned?
And he always replied, that peace is not the reward at the end.
It's the seed you plant at the beginning.
Across cities and continents, David's simple message began to ripple out. Young entrepreneurs started waking up 10 minutes earlier just to be silent. Busy parents turned off their phones for an hour and sat under trees with their kids. Students began writing poems again. Musicians wrote music that didn't trend, but healed. Something strange happened in that decade. The world didn't get quieter, but more people began learning how to hear themselves amid the noise because of one man who sat beside a river and listened, and then shared that silence person by person, soul by soul. David never tried to change the world. He simply changed his relationship with it. That was enough. One winter evening, as snow dusted the trees and the stars hung silently in the sky, David stepped outside his cabin. The air was cold but clean. The fire inside crackled softly. He was alone but not lonely. He looked up and whispered, "Thank you, Eli. You were the quiet that saved my life." He walked to the stream nearby. It was partially frozen but still moving, just like time. He sat on a rock, closed his eyes, and smiled. No phone, no camera, no audience. Just a man and a river, and silence that spoke volumes. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do, the bravest, most powerful choice in the world, is not to fight, not to shout, not to conquer, but simply to sit beside your own river and listen. Even if it takes you years to hear it, even if the world calls you strange, even if no one else understands, if you can learn to truly listen, you will never again feel lost, because the peace you're chasing outside was always flowing inside, like a silent river, just waiting for you to return.